Morning, everybody. Morning, Mike. This is Talking Niagara this morning with Peter Giblett and Dave Wheeler. It is Tuesday, April 15th, so we're halfway through April now. What is happening, Dave?
What is happening where, you mean?
with the year, Anyway.
Yeah, that's right. I've already got my Christmas list out.
Yeah, I know. And I'm hoping I'm featuring on that fairly highly. You got me down for the new Maserati, eh?
Well, I can't give you a lump of coal, but I can give you a piece of uranium that's kind of discharged. Is most
a piece
of uranium waste. Yeah,
that'll keep my phone going for the next 500 years.
Yeah, really. Yeah, the half-life of uranium.
Yeah. All right. So Mayor Campion from Welland, Mayor Campion went to Germany. I believe he went to the Hanover Maize trade show, which is the largest trade fair in the world, and good for developing new trade.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that Karen Fraser sent us an article the other day about, if you want to go back to that, I'd like to read that article again before we talk about it in length, but if Karen is there,
we can. I'd forgotten about the Karen article.
Yeah, so when we see Karen pop up, we'll have to apologize to her. But it is about possible conflict of interest with Peter Angelo and the city and the lands.
No, I have that, but it's kind of on the back burner, if you know what I mean. We can pull it up at that point. Yeah.
When Karen comes, we'll just say we'll get to it tomorrow because I like to have a better, closer look at it.
Yeah,
I read it and I want to read it more carefully.
Yeah, well, I've been two minds about this anyway. We'll get to it.
Yeah. Anyway, so Campion from Welland has gone to Germany to try to sell the Welland for investments in Germany.
It's a good thing. It's what I'd expect of a mayor.
Yeah, and he was careful to say that they just hitched on to the Canadian delegation that was going there anyway, and that basically what they didn't really have to pay too much, just accommodations. So we know that Frank and the boys went there to have a big party.
Well, there's Alberta minister was there. The Alberta minister was there as well. So I think it's a good thing. We should be showing off our wares, especially at a time like this. As you keep saying, and I agree with you, that you're not going to develop new markets overnight. But again, what you have to do is be present and show up and wave the flag at some of these new markets in order to make your presence felt.
Yeah, apparently there's two companies that are now interested in investing in Welland. He can't name them right now.
Yeah.
But this particular trip had nothing to do with those two companies that are interested in or perspective. Well, it looks like they have a very good chance of winning contracts from these people to invest in Welland, but he can't mention them. But this particular trip was for other players, and in this particular place, Hanover Messe is the world's leading industrial trade fair and brings together key players in engineering, energy, digitalization, and automation. And partner in that show this year.
Yeah, there were 124 exhibitors from Ontario, 37 exhibitors from Quebec, 32 from Alberta, 23 exhibitors from BC. So it's a good thing to have been there.
Yeah. So investors, Canada should be open for investment all over the place. Normally, we try to dangle the carrot in front of our big U.S. partner, but it's become very real, very, very important to understand that that's going to be an issue for a while. And
this is a major trade show because, I've heard of this trade show before coming to Canada. It was one of, just as a, it's an engineering type trade show that is one of the biggest in the world, I believe.
Oh, okay. What else do you know about it?
I don't know too much about it. I have heard about it. Like before coming to Canada, I used to hear about it. A lot of people used to go there. It's primarily engineering. It's primarily about, more the heavier industry. I'm not saying heavy industry, but it's not about steel mills and things like that. But it's more about, industrial, industrial power than anything else. And that's what Welland is all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that big battery plant that's going in for the Japanese battery separating plant going in, that's a big deal. That takes a lot of property to do that.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're right on the Welland Canal is a big thing there. And Campion here says they're trying to work with the Transport Canada on the seaway management, and at one point even tried to expropriate property along the canal. That didn't work. Nevertheless, they are still flouting the fact that the canal is right there.
Yeah.
So and when you're talking about heavy things that require heavy components and when the product, when it's done, is heavy, what better way to transport than
on ship?
Yeah. And then and plus there's probably, and I would imagine there's probably rail hubs very close there too, or could be provided.
Oh, there is a rail hub. Yeah, you can put it on rail or you can put it on ships. Mm-hmm. Right.
That's the best way to transport things that are very heavy.
Yeah, exactly. So just come straight out the plant, straight onto the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the fact that they have the seaway right there available to them, that's part of the plug for Welland. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, good luck. I think it's a good thing. People should be, we should be looking at things like that.
Yeah, and right away, I think that the first thing we should do is send the army in to make sure that the U.S. doesn't own the Welland Canal.
No, what you got to do, you see, at each end of the Welland Canal, you've got to have a tank in placement on each side, facing out towards the ships, menacingly at the ships. You see, showing their guns at the ships, with proud Canadian flags on each end of the Welland Canal.
Well, that's
and when American ships go down, they kind of go and follow them.
That won't bother them one bit, because the Americans know that we have to start up our tanks with a pull rope. They're so old.
Yeah.
And because it's the Canadian Army, no one remembered to bring the shells for the cannon.
Yeah. Yeah.
In any case, Frank's gone over to Germany to flog inexpensively. It appears that he just jumped on the Canadian initiative that was there, and they didn't set up any kind of booth or anything like that, but went there just to sort of, it looks like they're going there. They're just a network, at least, to take advantage of some parts of it.
Well, that's why
and of course, the accommodations and stuff were paid by the taxpayers. So I would like to know what hotels the guy stayed in, and how many escort services they called.
You want accountability. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do see this, and despite Mike's comment here, I see this as different than when our mayor went to China. Right. This is
that's an issue that Mike Bush was brought up. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This is an issue about getting jobs, and I'll disagree with you, Mike. On these types of occasions, if you're building relations for getting jobs, for building jobs, and not just building houses like this, housing investment you could get from anywhere. Let's be honest. Why do you have to go to China for that? That's about some form of bribery going on there. I think we all know that. The thing is about this is I think there's a practical longer term benefits for Welland, potentially, and the Welland Canal, because everybody, as soon as you mention Welland, you're gonna Welland Canal.
Well, I think of when I first think of Welland, I think, well, I won't go into it, but yeah, I think
I know you're in your anchovy pizza.
Yeah, I was thinking of the Welland, the home of the anchovy pizza, because I think of any city in the world would have a pizzeria just smothered in anchovies, nothing else, it would be Welland. They're probably working on the coconut pizza right now.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Well, someone thought of a pineapple one before us. Let's do a coconut one.
Never tried coconut on the pizza.
No, I just invented it, but I'm thinking it's probably a Welland response to pizza.
Okay, so Niagara South candidates debated, including the Conservatives.
Dun, 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 dun. Well
done. I think actually that the Conservative candidate Fred Davis, I think he's kind of what you would call an old-fashioned Conservative anyway.
Maybe, but the Conservatives have, and it's in articles coming up, the Conservatives are having a terrible time right now.
They are. So what about that?
Yeah, they and one of their, and we saw how it didn't work for Ruth Ann Newesteg to stay away from the press, which seems to be the similar thing that the province was doing, that the federal Conservatives are doing, but it's not working. It's not working here at all because of anyway, they went on, let's just say that they had their regular arguments, and they're talking about the NDP got a little bit of noise in here because it's talking about the 10,000 families that are waiting for a list of housing right now, she said, and the NDP had a $16 million national strategy that would work with provinces to give them tools, to give everyone the tools to build homes faster. That seems to be an issue that will probably draw flat because the Liberals are already talking about wartime houses, prefabbed houses that go up quickly and can provide accommodation. So I don't know how much punch that had with the regular voters.
Yeah.
And right now, let's make it very clear that everybody around everywhere is much more concerned about their economic futures, particularly what's going on in the U.S. right now, and particularly in this area where we're trying to draw investments, but the investment scene is all turned upside down. The markets may be evaporating from the U.S. and all this other stuff. So I think the homeless and the housing thing, that's still very high up there. But let's face it, the main issue is going to be, am I going to have a job tomorrow?
Yeah. And let's face it, the NDP's $16 million national housing strategy is not exactly a great deal of money.
That's I read that, and 16 million, don't they mean like 160? Even 160 would be,
or even 16 billion, those would be reasonable figures. I don't see 16 million as a lot of money. It's a drop in the ocean in government spending these days.
Yeah, and then we have this counter by longtime PPC advocate Terrace, dismissed federal housing interventions as ineffective. And so basically, there's stuff about housing here, and and immigration until houses are stabilized. He's pointing that out, but it has already been addressed by both conservatives and the liberals. That so I don't know. These are things that they're bringing up, but I'm not so sure how much of effect it will have on the voters and their voting abilities or voting preferences. What do you think? I mean, you got your typical stuff here about healthcare and all those. Normally, it would
Yeah,
have been a big deal, you know.
and as you would expect, as you would expect, of course, the NDP candidate and the Peter Tarras, the PPC candidate, took the opposite views upon things like healthcare, because NDP believes in public healthcare, whereas Peter Tarras believes in more privatization.
Yeah, and there was, of course, they've already gone towards the Niagara Health plant closures of Port Colborne and Fort Erie, which is still an issue. It doesn't matter if you're provincial, regional,
You
or
mean the
federal.
hospital closures?
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
and that still hasn't been resolved.
Well, that is something that Niagara South is going to struggle with. Pretty well everybody unless you live in Thorold, pretty well everybody else in Niagara South is got hospital problems, because it means they have to get to Niagara Falls or St. Catharines in order to get treatment, and that's a whole vast area that is underfunded for treatment.
Yes, that's I don't know, and they talked about a bunch of different things, reorganizing. Of course, the catchphrase is, we're going to have to reorganizing our entire economy, blah 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 blah. These are easy words to say. It's what people have been thinking about, obviously, but I think probably when it comes down to dollars, in the end, it's going to be this Trump and the trade issues and tariffs that will probably swing the voter one way or another. And currently at least, Carney seems to have had the advantage of being thought of as the best person to be able to manage that. And right now, like as I said before, the conservatives are got a kind of a civil war going on in their campaign, and with our robust, strong trend. Yeah, so you get comments like, with robust, strong transportation network, our location with North American market, taking full advantage of our advanced manufacturing. So so you get lots of stuff like that, like stuff that you normally like to hear. But
I want to ask a question for you, get your view upon this. One of the candidates standing here was what's his name? Not Fred. No, it's David Verdova of the Christian Heritage Party. I see the Christian Heritage Party as kind of a little different from the Conservative Party.
Quite a bit different.
Other than Christian, it's got emphasizing Christian values, but again, that's a foundation typically of conservatism. But you don't know that it's necessarily the conservative in terms of fiscally conservative, and I don't see it as anything different than that.
Well, there's that religious thing too, but they would be anti-abortion, for instance. They would be something like that.
Okay, I accept. But given that, that would likely be an issue, that a question. But I see it as largely, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of having parties named after, political parties named after religions. I think the political parties should stay clear of religion, but that's me.
Well, this party's been around for a long time. They don't really,
Yeah, in the 80s, aren't they, or something?
yeah, they don't
Yeah.
really track that well
Yeah.
when it comes to voting, but they're always there.
Yeah. So for a for a federal party, they're one of the longest founded parties, because the Conservative Party, as it's currently founded, only dates back till 2005. The Liberals are a bit longer than that, but even so, the Liberals have been reconstituted about 3 times in the last 100 years.
Well, the Conservatives was the party that founded Canada back in 1867.
Yeah, but not the same Conservative Party as is today.
Well, it changes, it evolves. It's just like the Whig Party became the Republicans, and so they had the Whig Party, and then they kind of reconstituted themselves, became the Republican Party. I think that's the way it went. I think the Whigs become the Republicans. I forget, there might have been a precursor to the Democrats too. But
yeah, there was
basically
the Democratic Republic. The precursors of the Democrats were the Democratic Republicans.
Yeah, so basically what we have is a party that pretty much the same. The Conservative Party today is very much the Conservative Party of Mulroney, was the Conservative Party of
but it's
Baker. Basically, it's just an evolution of the same party. Remember, for a while there, that was the Conservative Alliance Party, and then it became the Progressive Conservative Party.
Yeah.
So
it's not just a case of using different names, because the Conservative Alliance Party was an alliance between the Alliance Party and the Conservatives. It was a merger of those two parties, right?
Yeah, because they had very similar values, and they knew they couldn't do it each on their own.
Yeah.
So they came together. Whereas in different countries, the Alliance Party would still be there, the Conservative Party would still be there, and they would get together and form a government together, and alliance together in the party. But in Canada, it's a little bit different. If you got the Conservatives decided that those two parties should come together, so the Conservative, like what was his name? I can see his face right now. The Alliance Party leader, Manning. So he, at the time when the Conservative Party was doing very poorly, then they made peace with the Alliance, and because their values are very, very similar.
Mm.
But the Conservatives right now are having a difficulty, apparently.
We'll be getting onto that in a little while. Yeah. In fact, actually, why don't we move to that exactly right now?
Okay.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I've got these the wrong way around. All right. Let me. Nope. What the hell has happened here?
What was wrong? Oh, I just to fill in while you're doing what you're doing there. Last night at the Kiwanis meeting, we brought a lot of old history into the to see if we can get rid of a whole bunch of stuff that we were storing. We were storing stuff that went back to 1932, basically.
Wow.
And stuff to do with the Kiwanis Music Festival and stuff like that. So we have to throw out all the old booklets that were there from that.
Have you thought about selling them? Is there any value to them?
It's not much value to them at all. All it is the programs for all the different music events that go back to 1934. No,
if you've got people who are now famous from those events, there might well be some value on them.
You got a point there. You got a point.
I wouldn't just throw them out. There's collectors for all these things, and you could raise money that way. I'm thinking you guys could actually, you could get some extra money. Don't just throw them out. Just think about it. I don't know the value of them, and hey, but there's some people out there who may appreciate them.
Well, I grabbed one booklet because I was playing in the Anmar concert band and also the Anmar Grade 9 band. And I looked for 1969. I found it, and there's the band. There's our band, and somebody had wrote in it the piece of music that we had played, the fireworks, Handel's fireworks concerto or whatever it was, and as soon as I saw it, I remember the tune, like that, you know.
Yeah.
So that was kind of neat. So I just grabbed.
So
that.
what did the person write in it?
It would be people like, for instance, it would be people like Kiwanis who were writing things down, or it also could have been the adjudicators or the music teachers or anybody else that happened to be there at the time. And
so they were kind of applauding or commenting upon the band's musical prowess. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And there was a guy there whose sister, one of the Kiwanians there last night, it said, "Oh, my sister was in those all the time." And so we dug up in the box and we found one of the programs where his sister was competing when she was about 8 years old. Her name was right there, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so what we were moving on to was the Conservatives fear a dysfunctional campaign. Conservative sources are describing a campaign that is highly disorganized.
Yeah, this is a big deal, like, because even Ford has criticized the Conservative, and there's a big problem with the Conservatives and how they've approached this election. And what this article says is there's a Conservatives fear dysfunctional campaign and civil war in the party sources.
Well, they've lost 6 candidates to my knowledge to date.
Well, this article is not about them, though.
No.
It's about the infighting that the Conservatives have. They stubbornly stayed on the talking points that got them to the point where they were expected to form the next government, because Trudeau's government was not popular. Trudeau wasn't popular. And the talking points of the Conservatives at that time were very popular.
Yeah.
And they stubbornly stuck to those points rather than to swing and pivot to the more engaging topics that Canadians are struggling with right now. And that, of course, is the tariff thing and the threats to our economy. So the Conservatives were slow to move towards that and stayed on point with their previous attacks. Yeah. Well, things had changed, and now they see their numbers plunging, and it looks like Carney's going to win. And that's and a lot of it is the complaints that the Conservatives did not jump on board quick enough.
Yeah. I get it, but actually the thing is turning a bit now, because in fact there's over the last few days there's been about a 0.5 point move towards the Conservatives away from the Liberals. It's not much, but a 0.5 point over the next few days, maybe that brings the Conservatives back into a tighter race.
Well, we talked about that yesterday, or well, not yesterday, but recently, about how the Conservative points go up when Trump gets out of the discussion. When Trump gets out of the discussion, then the Conservative points go back up. When Trump gets back into the discussion and more tariff threats or more tariff chaos it comes up, then the Liberals go back up. But one of the problems of the Conservatives, they claim here, is that it's too tightly wound
around the inner circle. Yeah,
it's nobody's been able to make their own decisions. They have to check with the top brass, and that takes time, and they can't respond quick enough. And it says here, several of the sources allege that too many decisions have to go through conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, chief strategist Jenny Byrne. Now, which makes it inflexible. And we do know that Pierre Poilievre runs a very tight ship. He runs a very, very tight ship. His Conservative Party. He does not let them wander off and make mistakes and do dumb stuff. So he's make sure that they're going to stay to plan. But it says here is there's no evidence of a master plan. Said Conservatives are left to figure things out on their own because it takes them too long to vet whatever they want to do through the top brass, which is this Jenny Byrne. Now, Doug Ford has come out quite critically of the federal,
because he's basically saying Poilievre wouldn't be losing if he had my campaign manager.
That's right. And
hey, I don't think this. I'll be honest. This is not about an attack upon Poilievre. This is about Doug Ford unofficially placing his hat in the ring for the new federal leadership when Poilievre steps down.
I'm not so sure. I wouldn't take that step and say that. Definitely, the Conservatives would be looking for a guy like Doug Ford because he has been able to hold on, win the Parliament. What now? 3 times here in Ontario.
Yes, he's won 3 times.
He's got quite a mandate now, very decisive mandate. And the way he does politics is different too. It's not the bad guy, good guy thing that Poilievre is doing, where he ramps up and he gets on to the about the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and stuff like that, which kind of brings
I don't think. You see, the problem here is when you start bringing up things like World Trade Organization, most people, their eyes glaze over and they go, I don't even know what the heck that is.
Well, it was very, very good when all the conspiracy stuff was coming up about Klaus Schwab or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Klaus Schwab.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you're going to take over the world and make communists of everyone. And, we got to be really afraid of that. Well, it really does. The World Trade Organization really doesn't have that much of an effect. It's more of a think tank than anything as I can see. But and you got the liberals strutting around with their suits, the fancy suits, and they're in the World Trade Center. And of course, that bugs people a lot, but it really has nothing much to do with us. And when you go on about the World Trade Center and that kind of thing, it doesn't really make.
Not World Trade Center. You mean WTO?
Yeah, that's it. WTO.
Yeah.
Anyway, so World Trade Organization. So I don't know. It's the Conservatives lost the Liberals. Anyway, so there's going to be a lot of difficulties, and I can imagine the frustration of the people out west who finally think, okay, finally we'll get a conservative government in again. We've waited long enough to get one, so we're going to get another one now, and finally our concerns will be looked upon, and that is pushing cessationist attitudes in places like Alberta who think they'll never get the proper federal considerations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just ask you this: the picture of Doug Ford in this article that was taken last month, isn't he looking fit? Isn't he looking fit and ready for the job?
I don't know. I don't see the picture here.
It's right at the top of the article. He's slimmed down. He really has slimmed down. He's wearing a slim line suit, and he's looking good. Looking what I would say very prime ministerial.
Oh, so you're looking at this article, Ford pushing for The Truth Hurts, that one by the National Post. I was on the CBC one. Yeah, he's definitely got his girdle on.
He's looking good in that one, that's for sure. Yeah, he's definitely got his girdle on. Yeah. No, I was looking about the
That's as close as Ford's going to get to svelte.
Well, yeah, okay, but whichever way. But you see, whichever way, the Conservatives have got problems right now. And
yes,
the weird thing is that 6 months ago we were saying it was their election to lose, and what are they doing? Losing it.
They're losing it, but the seismic shift has happened. Of course, we've talked about, like you mentioned that Polyev had that one trick, right? The carbon tax was very, very unpopular.
Yeah.
And as much as the Liberals kept arguing for it and on that, as soon as Carney gets in, he was a proponent of it before, but he could see that was political suicide to support that. So what's the first thing he does? He drops it.
Yeah.
Done.
Well, I don't know whether he was a proponent of it before. I just know that as soon as he became leader, he's like, nope, where the carbon tax is gone.
You might have I think he was a proponent in the early days, but you might have something there because when the Liberal Party went out to BC and brought Carney in to talk to them, I think that was one of the things he told them. You got to get rid of the
carbon tax. He was definitely, at that point, he was, I don't know what his prior to that point, I don't know what his views on carbon tax were.
Right? Well, he does have a very strong environmental aspect to him. That, like, he's very, very strong environmentally on one hand, but on the other hand, his own business dealings don't seem to reflect that. So there seems to be a potential hypocrisy.
But remember what Brookfield do as a company is not actually based upon. He's not the only person in that company.
No, but if it does not comply with the same sort of philosophy that he purports to have, then it can be thought to be as hypocritical.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from, and there's an argument to be made there. Definitely, there's an argument to be made there. Yeah.
Well, anyway, the Liberals are not in trouble. The Conservatives are.
Yeah, very much so right now, very much so. And right at the moment, it almost has to be said that, that Mark Carney is Mr. Teflon, isn't it? Nothing sticks.
Well, right now, and he also looks like a hero because he has to stop, and it very, very clearly points out to the world, basically, that, I got to stop my campaign right now to go deal with issues of the government. In other words, it looks like he's already well into dealing with the tariffs and the other issues of government. He has to stop his campaign and go and deal with the menace from the South. And he already looks like the leader that will be there to continue that. So normally that would be a disadvantage to somebody on campaign, that they have to stop campaigning to deal with issues of the government. But this particular case, everything's turned around, because when he has to leave the campaign to deal with the menace to the South, then he's looked like a bit of a hero. And he's already dealing with our problems, and so he gets points for that. Whereas
but
that loss of exposure would have damaged him in any other kind of campaign.
Well, let's be honest. Irrespective of who is prime minister, the prime minister's office back in Ottawa would be in constant contact with the prime minister and would pull him off the campaign if they need be. Whether that were Polyev, whether that were Trudeau, or even Harper, that would have gone through exactly those kind of processes.
Yeah, I know, but like I said before, it would be detrimental to his campaign to have left it. But in this particular case, because he's rushing off to deal with perceived emergency, it's to his advantage.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's move on. Manitoba Hydro is not going to renew a 500 megawatt hydroelectric export contract.
I think those are two deals that they're not going to renew. Now, let's make this very clear. Manitoba is not shutting off the power to the United States because of any tariff thing or anything to do with
it just hasn't. This has been going on for some time. The contracts are coming to an end and they're just expiring.
Yeah, so these are expiring, and Manitoba already supplies, what is it, Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota and Wisconsin, I think it is. It already supplies them with 2,000 megawatts already. So this is 500 megawatts that these deals have come to an end. And when the Manitoba government is now going to reinvest that and send 50 megawatts of that up north into the Iqaluit region, up in north of them into the territories. The other amount of power they're going to keep for Canadian development, and this is important because they even in their press press release, this is for development. They mentioned AI and the demands of AI and how they're going to take that power and use it in Canada instead of the United States. Now, it's only 500 megawatts. To put this into perspective,
we don't normally think of, we don't really think of Manitoba as being an energy, as being a power expert, as a powerhouse, if you know what I mean.
Well, it has a lot of power. It has surplus power,
but it's good. It's good that it's got surplus. Yeah, absolutely, it's good.
Well, that's one of its exports, and its exports power to the United States, and it still makes power there. I'm trying to dig out Canoe. I think his name is Canoe, which is the premier, Manitoba Premier Wab Canoe.
Wab Canoe, yeah.
Now he's said that quite publicly that they intend to continue to sell power to the States. But these particular 500 megawatts of that contract has come to term. And instead of renewing that contract, they're going to take that 500 megawatts and use it in Canada, and full 50 megawatts going north. But to give you some kind of a sample, that's not a whole lot. When I worked at Nanticoke, one of the generators there of 8 generators they had there, could do up to 500 megawatts.
Yeah,
that was a 4,000 megawatt station at its highest. All generators.
So a single generator is 500 megawatts. So that's what I'm saying. This is not big. This is not huge amounts of energy, but it's good to be. It's good to have it in capacity, spare capacity.
Yeah, I think our hydro here, our hydro plant here in town, makes a lot of power. I think it's around 2,200 megawatts, but that is all of Niagara Falls. So and that only provides about 20% of our base load, and most of it comes from nuclear. So it's small amounts of power when you're thinking of an industrial province like Ontario. So it's in volume it's small.
It's small fry, but it matters.
Yeah, and for the West, and that's a lot of power for the West. So like I say, they're repatriating this power, and they have talked about, because now AI is going to be a big driver of power. Power is the new oil, basically, coming through, because AI is anticipated to increase power demands incredibly. Now, previous to this, it was Bitcoin and things like that was going to take an enormous amount of power to maintain itself. Well, the AI going forward is going to require massive amounts of electricity. So I think what he's doing basically is he's drawing in, repatriating that power for his own province or provinces close by because he anticipates um, demand in our own country. Also, part of the strategy is to develop uh, Canadian markets as well for that. So he's talking about shipping it probably west, maybe even to Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, yeah. So good luck. I think that's a good thing. A good thing. You know, didn't really think much about Manitoba as being a mass power producer, but then again, you know, we're talking about an area, even in the American states, they're probably not exactly huge power users in that zone.
Yeah, it says here they have an appetite for a big Canadian trade energy project, while Manitoba's hydro rates are frozen for this year. Has applied for a series of 3 annual electricity rate hikes of 3.5%, beginning in 2026.
Yeah.
Drought and low water levels over the past few years have caused Manitoba Hydro revenues to dip. Crown Corporation said that in recent applications. So that's an issue too. Power is going to be one of those things, and I anticipate. Unfortunately, we haven't sort of exploited our own ability to make hydroelectric or nuclear power plants. I know it's a very, very controversial subject, but we have massive amounts of uranium in Saskatchewan, and we should be exploiting that big time. And particularly when the world is going to need a lot of power, man, we could build nuclear plants and sell that energy to the south. That would be cool. But that each one of those nuke plants take about 15 years to build, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, so they're not, and it's like actually the same thing as Trump has apparently backed down because he's got some guarantees about bringing auto industry back in into the US, but of course it isn't going to happen tomorrow.
His recent, yeah. So he's back down on the auto supply chain.
Yeah,
because he's beginning to be convinced that it will take 2 or 3 years. Although the way he sounds like it, I'll give him a couple months more. What they're doing is stockpiling parts like crazy. That's what they're doing. They're stockpiling all kinds of parts to make it through the early parts of the tariff.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised, but that basically is not a good idea, because the trouble with stockpiling parts is that if you stockpile a part that then is found to be faulty, you know, traditionally you change your supply chain to actually ensure there's no faulty parts. But if you've got 10,000 of them sitting in the edge of the factory, you've got no choice but to use them.
Well, what they're doing is they're changing, like everything is in just-in-time delivery.
Yeah.
That's what made it so efficient. So they're going against that philosophy now. They're going back to the old days, is stockpile as much parts as you can.
The good thing about just-in-time is if you identify a part to your car, let's say a starter motor, that's develops a particular fault, you can correct that fault once you identify it. That's the advantage about just-in-time.
Well, just-in-time also is much less expensive because you don't have to warehouse the parts.
Yeah,
Believe
exactly.
me, when I went, I did a dismantling of. I was on a crew that dismantled a stainless steel line in Atlas Steel that sent it to South Korea, and in the storeroom there, they did the old-fashioned way of storing up as much parts as they could. That was what they did back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we found parts and stuff like that went back many, many years. Like they were there, they had been on the shelves and not used because whatever the machines they were used for were no longer in place. There was others that replaced them, but they had bearings and seals and stuff like this that went back decades and decades.
A bearing that's this big for a plant that only needs a bearing that's this big nowadays.
Yeah. So there they were, all stored there, and
Yeah.
that was a big capital investment that got wasted.
Yeah.
So you first of all you have to put up the capital investment, and that capital investment that you put in there, you can't earn money off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's, obviously there's a certain amount of sense in keeping a certain number of parts, a dozen parts locally, but what you don't want is to have hundreds of them locally, right?
Yeah, but the whole thing is, if you need steel to roll steel for cars, then you want the steel to show up. You don't want to have to buy a whole lot of it and leave it there, because that's money that's investing in stuff that's not making you money.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
what you've done is you've taken your money, bought that stuff, it's sitting in a field waiting to be rolled, but you don't get around to it for a few months. That's 2 months of money that could be made money some other way.
Yeah.
So that's why just in time came around. Plus, it's much more efficient system.
Okay.
But what we're going to find in the States right now is, even in Canada or wherever, it's going to be stockpiling of parts, hopefully to get past this first round of tariffs.
Yeah, because
you see that what will happen. It seems that the adjustments keep happening over and over, and Trump has to be convinced that the USMCA agreement that he did author back in 2018 is worth its salt. For some reason, he just got this blinders on that if it's made in Canada, it should be made here. After you made a free trade deal, which opens up that market and makes things more efficient, and then you start to close.
But you see, USA gets more. Even with the car parts deal, USA makes more out of it than Canada does.
Well, yeah, and what he doesn't seem to understand, or what has to be explained to him, is if you take raw aluminum from Canada, then you add worth to it. It's just like, for instance, like they put that outrageous tariff on Lesotho because they got diamonds from them. But think of it this way: like, you're a jeweler. Let's say you're a jeweler in, I don't know, Chicago or something like that.
Yeah.
You get your gold from Canada, you get your diamonds from Lesotho, and you make jewelry and you make money on that.
But
right?
Again,
because you add worth to it, and you're not going to be able to sell that jewelry back to Lesotho because they won't be able to afford it, and you might sell some of it to Canada, but basically.
But again, don't think of diamonds as jewelry. Think of diamonds as like international cutting tools, for example.
But there was the example I was using.
Yeah.
It was the example I was using, that you don't have diamonds, but you want jewelry, and you want the person who make the jewelry to be in the United States, but he has to get his gold from somewhere, and he has to get his diamonds from somewhere. And then they add the value to that. So that's the part that they don't understand. Yeah, they have a trade deficit with Lesotho and diamonds, and they have a trade deficit with Canada for gold, or you know what I mean? And but they don't have it themselves. But then they take that material, add value to it, sell it, and there's taxes derived from it, and all other stuff.
One of the things I've got to make the point about is that 99.9% of the diamond market has got nothing to do with jewelry. It's about industrial diamonds that are used for cutting, etc.
Well, yeah, but that's we mentioned that before.
Yeah,
but that was my example. You know what I mean?
I know.
That was my example. You could say like aluminum too. Like the United States doesn't have aluminum. Well, it doesn't have the smelters. We have the smelters. It wants to make a piston, so it gets the aluminum from us.
Absolutely.
It adds value to it, puts it in a car. Now they make money off the materials they got from places.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so here's the big question. The BBC's at it. The BBC's found the answer. Get it? It comes from the BBC, so you know it's for real. Trump's real goal is 277 square miles of sea around the Mackay Seal Islands, just off of where the main Maine-New Brunswick border occurs.
Yeah, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek what Trump really wants from Canada, and they talk about this gray zone that's between maritime Canada and Maine.
It's been under dispute since the 1700s.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, it talks about a U.S. Lobster fisherman who has fished this gray zone. So there's this old rocky island, and throughout most of its history is probably thought to be nothing but a thing to avoid because you might crash against it out there. It's uninhabited, stony island. The Canadians have put a lighthouse on it. The Americans occupied it during the First World War, and it's been for the most part, people don't really care too much about it because it's where it is. Whoever owns that island owns the rights to more of the lobster fishing that goes on there, and it is a big deal. And it's a constant hassle between the Canadians and the Americans. The Americans claim that the Canadians they take too many, and the Canadians complain that the Americans take the big ones, which they shouldn't be taking because those are the big breeders. And it goes on and on and on like that. And there's this zone. You can see it comes from Maine and it goes down between the Maine and New Brunswick border, and then it goes into the sea. And there's this little rocky island called Machias Seal Island.
Yeah.
And that wee island is like pretty much dead center in the line that should go through there. And I don't know, maybe we should divide it in half. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, maybe. And then we send the troops down. We send the troops down once every 6 months, and they can put bourbon on, and we can put some Canadian whiskey on there. Keep trading it.
So here we go. This is just another. So the lobster wars. Cutler, Maine was the closest U.S. town to the gray zone, and that's because it's just a collection of huts, basically. But it's a lobster.
Cutler is a lobster fishing port, I believe.
Well, it described it here as it's just a collection of scattered houses and one supply store, and for good reason. It's a lobster wholesaler. So that's basically what it does. It's raison d'etre. Really?
Yeah, no. The weird thing is, I see. I didn't know it was that small a place, but I've heard of Cutler as being a lobster center.
Well, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Kind of interesting,
Yeah. So this continuous hoofrah. America's accused Canadians of operating under a different, more accommodating set of rules that allow them to catch larger lobsters. Canadians counter that the Americans have higher catch limits and are surreptitiously fishing in their territorial waters. I don't doubt that one bit, that both lobster guys are going on either side of this, inside this gray zone. And Americans have responded to their enforcement efforts with threats and violence, and some officers have refused to work the gray zone, probably because it's too frustrating. Canada regularly dispatches maintenance workers to Machias Island to check on the automated lighthouse, evidence they say of their control. The Americans point out that the U.S. Marines occupied the island during World War I as proof of their sovereignty.
Yeah, and the whole thing's been up. The whole ownership of these islands has been up in the air since the late 1700s.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wish they'd sort that kind of thing out. Basically,
I'm sure there's. Given it's, I would say it's fairly simple, as you said. Be blunt about it. Just cut it in half down the middle and just straighten the line on this gray zone and just leave it. Because I'm sure that Canadian fishermen fish on the American side and vice versa.
Well, the gray zone is this. What is called the gray zone is because if you ran ran the line to connect with the other lines, then it would cut that gray zone in half, and that is the lobster fishing ground that both sides need. So the Canadians, it's pretty hard for them to keep on one side of that line, and the Americans on the other side. So
We're
in the
talking,
past, they've come up with an agreement of a gray zone, which is called a gray zone, which
yeah.
doesn't belong to one or the other, at least for as far as fishermen are concerned.
Yeah, and fishing, basically, you can't control whether your boat's in the US territory or Canadian territory, because it's getting slapped around by the waves, and 1 minute you're in Canada, and the next minute you're in the United States. How can you control that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so they came up with this agreement before. Now the article goes around about U.S. territorial ambitions for Canada and parts of Canada, U.S. territorial ambitions for Greenland and the Panama Canal, and
And it also talks about the battle for natural resources. Canada, where Canada has vast supplies. But you see, here's the funny thing is about oil, and I always think about this, and it's true. It is true as in many parts of the world. When you see a place like Alberta having oil, and south of Alberta, there's Texas who's got oil. There's oil in between there somewhere. We just haven't found it.
Oh, they have found it. It's mostly shell. It's mostly the shell oil that we're talking about.
Yeah.
All kinds of it. That's what the U.S. is pumping out of there. It's fracking. Yeah. All that fracking stuff. North Dakota, South Dakota, all those places are fracking. Yeah. I think Manitoba, or not Manitoba, Montana as well. So they have fracking going on all over the place and drying out a rather high quality sweet crude. Unfortunately for them, the refineries were made to refine crude oil, heavier crude, and so they have to sell their sweet oil.
Yeah, but what I'm saying,
all kinds of it there.
Yeah. So the natural resources, just because you haven't found them, doesn't mean they're not there.
Well, they have found all kinds of them there. That's what Trump goes on about, to exploit the oil that they do have. So that's basically it for the oil part of it. Yeah. But the poor lobsters, that's quite a bit smaller market, but it does exemplify what is going on. We have this border dispute, and our East Coast fishermen are going through the lobster wars. It's something you would think that shouldn't really be happening. They do have a lighthouse there on that little island, and who knew that little island would make so much difference?
Yeah.
But we're unlikely to have the same kind of presence of mind that we had with the Danes, when the one little rocky island happened to be right in the middle of the line, and Canada claimed it, then Denmark claimed it, and there were never really any fights over it. And finally decided, we'll cut it right in half. You take half, I'll take half. Yeah. I don't think the Americans would go for something like that.
Well, not under Trump.
No. I mean,
yeah. In fact, the worst thing is about this picture is that outside the gray zone, to the northeast of the gray zone, there's an island there. There's an island cluster there that is actually south of the line, south of where the end of Canada is. Where the mainland Canadian border is.
I think those are Canadian islands. I'm not sure.
Oh, they are Canadian islands, because I can see that from the way they're colored. They're part of New Brunswick, but but I'm surprised they're not claiming them as well.
Well, it's that one little island. That's the one that is a real beast.
Yeah.
That's those ones are farther north and east of Natchez Island. So those ones are indisputable. That has already been taken care of. But that little rock in the middle of nowhere that nobody really cared about most of the time is that point. Is if it belongs to the U.S., then they get more of the lobsters, If it belongs to Canada, we get more of the lobsters. Like I said, we just cut it in half. So both and have a commonality of rules for both the Maine and downeaster uh,
Yeah.
lobster fishermen.
Yeah.
But anyway, you're running out of time here, young man.
Yeah, we have. Yep. Yep, we have. All right. Okay, so we're going to have to kind of leave it at that point. The Seal Island, that's the real dispute between Canada and the US.
Yeah, and don't worry, we're on top of this. We will report back any developments in the lobster wars.
But the biggest lobster war, as I understand it, is actually happens between on the west coast between the Americans and the Russians out in the Aleutian Islands.
Is that lobsters or is it crab?
No, it's lobster, I believe. Big lobster wars go on out there. I might be crab as well. I don't know. I thought it was lobster. Now
Well, they're most known for the Alaskan king crab. So
king crab. Okay, it's crab. Yeah, okay. That's crab wars. Yeah, you're right.
that's the best crab too. Yum yum, king crab. Yum yum.
All right. And that's
okay.
That's a fight.
And if I have to talk in a Russian accent, I will to get some king crab, or I guess switch back to crab. Anyway, so without further ado, I bid you adieu. Do not forget Gaza. Pray for peace.
Yeah, absolutely.